Before I begin this chapter, I regret I have sad news many of us in the modeling community have already heard, that Boyd Crompton lost his battle with cancer and passed away in early July, just a few weeks prior to my shooting this segment. Boyd was a true model master and an incredible artisan for our hobby, for our craft. His TrekWorks YouTube channel had build guides for many different models, including starships, vehicles, and figure kits. I discovered Boyd's incredible artistry in his valuable TrekWorks guides about 2 years ago when I built my first 1/350 scale refit Enterprise. It was a joy to watch Boyd's build guides, not just because of his valuable insights, but because it was evident he truly loved his hobby, and his enthusiasm and passion showed in every one of his videos, just as his immense skill showed in every one of his builds. I had just rewatched one of his video segments for guidance on assembling the secondary hull of the 1/350 scale refit earlier in the day that I read the devastating news that he had left us. It was heartbreaking when Boyd announced in October of 2023 on his Facebook TrekWorks page that he had been diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer and was soon to begin chemo treatments. It was equally sad when he announced he would continue posting his model projects and build guides, but they would be devoted to smaller and quicker builds so that he could get as many kits finished as possible. And thank you, Boyd. All of us in the modeling community offer deepest and sincerest condolences to Boyd's family. I just learned that he had recently celebrated his 40th wedding anniversary. As difficult as this is for all of us who loved his work, we know it must be devastating for his family and his closest friends. A quick search of Boyd's name on YouTube brings up some moving testimonials from his friends and fellow builders. Boyd will be missed, and it's heartbreaking we will have no more new build videos coming from him. But his TrekWorks channel is still available, so for now, his talent and his love for this hobby can still be enjoyed. Thank you, Boyd, and best wishes on your new journeys. Chapter 7 of Walker Street Shipyards represents a pretty major and advanced step in my modeling abilities as I venture into the undiscovered territory of making connections for the Tenna Controls Master Circuitry Board, which will run a lot of automated systems, blinking lights, a whole power-up sequence for the warp drive. And so this is all new to me, and because it is so new to me, I have brought in some consultants. I first brought over a good friend who is a Federation level electrical engineer, and we spread everything out on the dining room table along with the master wiring diagram from Tenna Controls and a couple of glasses of cold beer. Went through everything, and he gave me some really good insights into a lot of these connections and answered a lot of my questions. And in addition to that, I had a wonderful conversation with Ralph Tenaglia of Tenna Controls, who also was willing to answer a lot of my questions, very supportive, very knowledgeable of the fact that this is all new to me, and really it was a wonderful conversation. So now I am ready to venture into all of this. The first step is going to be wiring together and making all the soldered connections for pretty much everything that you see here minus the blue deflector dish. In other words, the LED strip lights, the bridge floods, the sensor floods, the tractor emitters, and the nacelle spots, the RCS thrusters, all of that is going to be wired together, and based on, again, consultations, it will all get powered into here and here. So I'm going to wire all those connections together, and I'll have a single positive lead and a single negative lead that will come here to the 12 volt 2 amp power supply, which is this, which I got from Evans Designs. They are also awesome. I have purchased a lot of my lighting material from them, and also had one or two great conversations with them. Everything runs through these two little wires here, your positive and your negative. There is an on-off switch. And so by hooking all of those static lights right here and here, prior to the momentary switches and prior to the electrical system coming into the circuitry board, as soon as I turn on the power source, all of those lights are going to come on independent of the automated systems. And then so there will be the momentary switches, switch 1 and switch 2, that will activate the entire warp core sequence, as well as independently your navigation lights and your strobe lights. I'm going to be using ribbon wire for the first time, and stranding it out, I think mostly for these, your navigation lights and your strobe lights. Now, there is an entire sequence that I am not going to utilize, and that is going to be for the shuttle bay. There is a sequence of 8 lights, two parallel banks of 4 that run here and here, that strobe into your shuttle bay as a landing sequence. And I want to be honest that I've seen that in a lot of kits, and there's very few kits where I actually like the way that it looked. There's something about the timing of the lights, the speed of the lights, the spacing of the lights, that to me just throws off the scale. It just doesn't quite look in scale with everything else in the shuttle bay. I have seen some builders who did a really good job and got it right, but I've never particularly liked the look of it. In addition to that, it's a sequence that we don't see. It's an effect that we don't see in Star Trek the Motion Picture. And a lot of this build is going to be trying to replicate the look and the feel of Star Trek the Motion Picture. And then in addition to all of that, just simply it's more to do. It's another 8 connections to make, and it's trying to figure out the logistics of where those landing sequence lights are going to go. So that is a function of the circuitry board that I am going to leave out. Now, key to the initial soldering is going to be figuring out the length of the runs of the wires, because some of these runs are quite long. Your navigation lights that are in the back, the tail ends of your warp nacelles, have to travel through the nacelles, have to run down through your nacelle struts, your secondary hull, up through the dorsal, and then into the connections in the saucer. There's also, of course, the chiller grills that'll be running down through here, and there's some assorted other lights. So I'm going to have to really calculate out and make sure that all of those wires are long enough before I assemble the nacelle struts. I'm going to have to make sure that I've got wires in place, because once those two pieces are glued together, you can't get anything through them. There's a very tight squeeze right here. Also, I am probably going to ultimately place the antenna controls circuit somewhere in here, affixed to the top of the upper saucer. This is where the vast majority of all your connections are going to be. A lot of your lights are going to be in here, and so it just makes a lot of sense that that is where this will go. Also, I think there will be enough room up in here for the circuitry board. There won't be a lot of room down in here in the secondary hall, thanks to the shuttle bay, thanks to the arboretum, thanks to some of the connections for the navigation dish. So I think that up in here is where there will be the most room. Probably this will be mounted upside down and affixed to the top of the saucer. So there's a lot of engineering that's going to go into not just how you connect everything to this and how you power all this to make sure it all works, but really, you know, the wiring logistics for how all the wires are going to flow through this ship. Again, my first step is going to be make all the connections for the LED strips and the various other floods. Some of those, I don't even have those lights yet. I have ordered them from Evans Design, so I'm going to have to just leave out some wires with nothing attached to them that will ultimately connect to them. Again, more logistics, more engineering. So my next step is start twisting together a lot of leads and start doing some soldering, and I'll get back with everyone. Thank you. Well, in Chapter 6 I mentioned that this wire wrapping wire is really great for this build because it is so thin that it can get through some difficult tight cavities in this build and is pretty easy for making connections onto some of your points for your LED strip lights and some of your bulb LED wires. However, it's so thin it is difficult to pre-tin it, which is a better step for making those connection points. Fortunately, when my Starfleet electrical engineering consultant came over so that we could review the wiring diagram for the Tenna Controls circuitry board, he made the very practical and actually very logical suggestion to strip the wire, bend it over, and twist it, and that doubles the thickness as well as kind of provides a more substantial soldering point and stronger connection. So that's what I've done with this, which is going to be a positive lead, and we are going to take a look now at tinning the wire. So I've already pre-tinned the soldering point, the soldering tip, and what we do is we heat the wire, keep the soldering iron below it, and then touch your solder, run it down the length, and there we have a pre-tinned wire. And so now we bring it over to, and forgive me that I lost focus for a sec there. But as you can see, we've got a nice pre-tinned wire, and I'm going to trim it just a little bit, then make the connection to the, trim it a little bit more, then make the connection to the positive lead, once again. Let me get a good focus for everybody here, and now come back, and as I have done before, get a nice little bead of solder and just touch it, and there's your connection. So now I am going to do the negative run, and we'll test a light, and I'll get right back with everybody. Okay, we have got the pre-tinned wires soldered on the connection points for this particular piece of LED strip lighting. So let's do a quick test with our 9-volt battery tester. and it lights up fantastic. So this is what we will do moving forward for the rest of the connections as we move into all of the connections for the lighting for that tenant controls circuitry board. A lot of connections have been made, a lot of lights have been wired together, a lot of lights have been placed, and now I am at the point for the first major lighting test for what is about probably 85% of all of the lights that are going to go throughout this ship. We have our LED strip lights here in the dorsals, here along the top of the secondary hull, the strong back, along the side of the port side of the secondary hull, and the starboard side of the secondary hull. I have gone ahead and temporarily placed, but not glued down, the shuttle bay. Still have a lot of work to do on the exterior of the shuttle bay. I'm considering putting in another tiny bank of lights here and here to light up these side windows that are back in the landing area. Then we have the 5mm floodlights. There are 5 of these. There's 3 that are going to go up into the top saucer dome that will hopefully cast out floodlighting onto the registry markings on the top of the saucer. There are 2 that are going to go down into the planetary sensor on the bottom of the lower saucer. We have these 2 3mm that are going to go onto the spotlights for the nacelles and project down onto the registry markings on the sides of the secondary hull. There's 4 so far. Ultimately, what's going to be 8 of the RCS thrusters. They will go around the saucer rim, and they will also go around the edge of the deflector dish. I finally remembered what these blue lights were for that I had ordered. They are going to go here in the very back of the secondary hull that will light up the tractor beam emitters, which need to be blue. So all of this comprises, again, the majority of the static lighting. There is some LED strip lights that I have already applied and fixed down in place that are at the top of the saucer that are going to light up such the officer's lounge, not the officer's lounge, excuse me, the rec deck and the back of the officer's lounge, actually, now that I think about it. So I haven't really hooked all of those up, but I have tested them to make sure they work. So all of this works. Now you might ask, what about that tenant controls circuitry board? I'm glad you asked, and let's take a look. Here again is your tenant controls master wiring diagram for the circuitry board, and here is that circuitry board wired together to the specifications of that wiring diagram. I have gone on at length about how this is new territory for me, a new learning curve for me. I can declare that this was mostly a very successful first attempt, and most everything came out exactly as it was intended to. There is a little glitch, there is something to overcome, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. But for now, let's take a look at how all this works. So again, we have a 12 volt 2 amp power adapter that powers everything, and when we turn it on, this was successful. You have your strobe lights, which are, there's 4 of them affixed at different places on the saucer and then on the back of the nacelles. These are your navigation lights. You have 2 reds and 2 greens that designate your port and starboard sides on the tops and bottoms of your saucer, and then more that run around the rim. And there's one that goes on the very back of the secondary hull and one that goes on the very top of the saucer. But now, let's take a look at the automated sequence for the warp sequencing, the warp and impulse sequencing. And this is where I ran into some problems. This light right here, which goes behind your deflector dish, is the first thing that comes on when you power up the sequence. It comes on amber, and then after a few seconds it becomes intense and gets brighter. And then what is supposed to happen is that it ramps down and comes up blue, which it did through a vast majority of the tests until something happened. I'll talk about what that something is, and so it no longer turns blue, which is something that needs to be fixed. But the rest of the sequence, you have your 3 impulse lights, 1 that will sit behind the impulse crystal, 2 that sit behind the impulse engines that come on as part of the sequence, and then they power down. And when that happens, your chiller grill lights come on to signify that you've gone into warp. Again, when these are on, this blue light in your deflector dish is supposed to be on, but it has malfunctioned. Depress the momentary switch again, and your chiller grills go off because you're coming out of warp, and your impulse lights come on as the system is supposed to be. This blue light stays on, but it's not functioning. And with another depression of the momentary switch, the impulse lights go out. So what has happened? This is probably the first major technical screw up that I had occur, certainly with this build, and maybe the biggest of the 2 builds so far. And I believe that the problem came from previously in the chapter I talked about how I wanted to have one power system for all of your window lights that are your static lights, and then coming into the power supply for the circuitry board, so that when you turn on when you turn on one thing, all of the window lights would come on, and then you could start pressing the momentary switches to activate the tenor control circuitry board. I did multiple tests, and again the blue light became amber, and all of the navigations and strobe work, but something that I did went awry when I tried to combine them all. It wasn't a major catastrophe, but that is what resulted in that blue light ceasing to function on that LED that sits behind the deflector dish. I've tried various different things. I got some replacement LEDs to try to fix that. The problem, I believe, is something that I've perhaps done with the board. I've had several really great conversations with Ralph at Tenor Controls, who first gave me a suggestion for how to test just to make sure that the blue light is still functioning on that bicolor amber blue LED, which is something that I'm about to do. Once we have made that determination that it's not the light, but something in here in the circuitry board, because right here is the connection that controls the amber turning to blue. What I'm going to do is I'm going to disconnect everything. I'm going to package this up. After a conversation I had today with Ralph, I'm going to send it back to Ralph, and he and his team will take a look at it. And he assures me it's a pretty common thing sometimes for people to make little minor mistakes. He did his best to make me feel like it wasn't a major catastrophe on my part, and he and his team will be able to rectify this. Then he'll send it back. It is unfortunate. It kind of puts me about 3 weeks behind on the build. I had hoped to be far past this point in the build, but it's just one of those things. For the most part, I'm very pleased that I got everything working at least for a little while. On my first attempt, I know that I made some type of miscalculation and electrical error resulting in a very minor function, but that light switching from amber to blue in the deflector dish is one of the main things that I wanted this build to incorporate. So I am going to work with Ralph and his team to overcome this mishap. In the meantime, when you take a look at all this massive wiring that is about to become all disconnected, I talked a little bit about how there's a lot of engineering and logistics involved at this point and further in the build, because there's a lot of design engineering for how all of this will be incorporated to being hooked up throughout. Most of this lighting goes into portions of the saucer. Some of it, again, 2 of them go on the very tips and in the nacelles, but a lot of the logistics will go into your power system. Will come into here. Your base will run up through a tube like this through the bottom of the secondary hull. So you're going to have to figure out how to utilize your power sources and run the wiring that will go up through the tube and ultimately into the saucer to connect into this massive wiring. So again, a lot of design, a lot of logistics, a lot of calculations. Before we even get there, I have to overcome whatever it was that happened with that blue light. I think this is a good point to wrap up Chapter 7. Like I said, I am now about 3, maybe even 4 weeks behind on my build and posting this video thanks to that malfunction with that changing amber blue LED, which worked up until the point that it didn't. So while I am waiting for Ralph and his team to figure out what I did wrong, I am going to turn back to finishing the Arboretum and maybe even get a good start on the lower planetary sensor on the lower saucer, maybe a few other things as well. So we will see everybody in Chapter 8, and again would like to offer condolences to the family of Boyd Crompton and say, Boyd, you were an enormous presence for the modeling community and you will be missed.